Congratulations all. As the title slide indicates, my name is Larry Allan, and I'm a project manager assigned to the BPOS team within the Office of Program Operations in CDER. I've been with the FDA since October 2015, and prior to working with the BPOS team, I was an RPM in the GI division. At that time, my portfolio was managing products intended to treat inflammatory bowel disease with a focus on Crohn's disease. I've had experience not only with NDAs, but with BLAs and combination products as well. So with my bona fides aside, I will now proceed with my presentation on post-approval responsibilities and obligations. Here we have our standard disclaimer slide. So our learning objectives for this presentation will be to provide you with a cursory overview of your responsibilities as an applicant once your NDA has been approved. This presentation will focus mostly on NDA-related obligations, although many of these requirements and obligations also will apply to BLAs and ANDAs. In the first half of the presentation, we'll go over responsibilities that apply to all NDA applicants, such as post-marketing safety reports and other types of required post-approval reporting, such as NDA annual reports. Then a short discussion of waivers and what needs to occur if you transfer ownership of your NDA to another applicant. The latter section will focus on some additional post-approval activities that can occur, including making changes to your existing NDA, submission of various types of supplements, and a short discussion of post-marketing obligations that you may have as a condition of approval for your product. For example, PMRs, PMCs, or REMS. Finally, I'll also briefly talk about safety labeling changes that could be required following approval of your NDA should new safety information arise. As always, should you have any questions concerning your application, either in the topic areas I'm planning to review or any other issues pertaining to your NDA, please don't hesitate to reach out to your RPM assigned to manage your application. That's why we're here. Okay, the next 3 slides I'm going to cover the CME challenge questions that I'm going to ask again at the end of my presentation, so please keep them in mind as I go through the slides. The first question will be true or false. US-based applicants only need to submit post-marketing 15-day alert reports for adverse drug experiences that occur within the US. Our second question is, which of the following information does not need to be included in the NDA annual report? A, the quantity of drug product distributed. B, PMR and PMC status reports. C, summaries of completed unpublished clinical trials. Or D, current pricing data. And finally, the last question, once a CBE 30 labeling supplement has been approved, how long does an applicant have to implement the changes to the promotional labeling and advertising? A, it must be updated promptly. B, 15 days. C, 1 month, or D, prior to submitting the next NDA annual report. In this section, we'll discuss some of the post-marketing regulatory requirements that apply to all applicants. I'm going to slightly deviate from the order that these requirements are outlined in 21 CFR 314 so that I can focus first on requirements that apply to all NDAs and then to additional obligations an applicant may have depending on the nature of their application. Again, the intent is not to provide a meticulous assessment of all regulatory requirements, but rather to provide an overview of the main points outlined within each cited regulation. Please refer to the specific regulatory reference and any applicable guidances for additional details and information. Although I have attempted to incorporate links to the relevant sources in the resources slides at the end of this presentation, this should not be considered an exhaustive listing. Okay, first we're going to discuss review of adverse drug experiences. An adverse drug experience is defined as any adverse event associated with the use of the product in humans, whether or not considered drug-related. This also includes, but is not limited to, events occurring in the course of the use of the product in professional practice, events arising from overdose of the product, whether accidental or intentional, events resulting from either drug abuse or withdrawal, and any failure of expected pharmacological action of the product. It includes information from both domestic and foreign sources, and any information derived from commercial marketing experience, post-marketing clinical investigations, post-marketing epidemiological or surveillance studies, reports in the scientific literature, and any unpublished scientific papers. The requirement applies to both applicants and non-applicants, and I will discuss the role of non-applicants in the next slide. So post-marketing 15-day alert reports. So this reporting is similar to what I had discussed on the previous slide. The serious and unexpected ADEs are reported regardless of whether they occurred within the US or originated outside of it. This reporting is similar in nature to the safety reporting requirements for clinical trials conducted under an IND. In other words, they have comparable reporting requirements and timelines. And this essentially fulfills the same function of ensuring that the FDA is notified in an expedited manner of unexpected and related serious events that occurred following administration of approved products. If additional information is not obtainable, you should maintain documentation of the steps you took to acquire additional information. Note that the FDA can also request that an applicant submit a follow-up report. So to avoid duplicative alert reports, non-applicants will typically report these events to the applicant, and then the applicant will subsequently submit them to the FDA. If the non-applicant provides these alert reports directly to the applicant instead, they must submit the reports within 5 calendar days of receipt of the reportable information. The applicant then has 15 calendar days to report the events to the FDA as previously noted. The non-applicant must also maintain a record of these reports, including a copy of each adverse drug experience report, the date the report was received by the non-applicant, the date the report was submitted to the applicant, and the name and address of the applicant. Next, we're going to discuss periodic adverse drug experience reports, also known as PADERs. So the FDA may extend or reestablish the requirement that an applicant submit quarterly reports, or require that the applicant submit reports under this section at different times than those stated. For example, the FDA may choose to reestablish a quarterly reporting requirement following approval of a major supplement. So you must include reports of all ADEs that have not been previously reported as 15-day alert reports. Periodic reporting of ADEs allows the FDA to review relevant safety information and evaluate the risk-benefit profile of products post-approval to determine if changes need to be made. For example, if changes to the existing label are warranted or if additional clinical trials are necessary. So as the PADER is specific to the US, submission of a PBRER allows you to harmonize global post-marketing reporting requirements into one report. Please refer to the Guidance for Industry providing post-marketing periodic safety reports in the ICH E2C format for additional information. And I've included a link to the guidance in the resources slide at the end of the presentation. Okay, now we're going to discuss some other post-marketing reports. So the first we have is an NDA field alert report. You must submit an NDA field alert report within 3 days of knowledge concerning accounts of any incidences that have caused the product or its labeling to be mistaken for another product, any significant chemical, physical, or other change in the product, including evidence of bacterial contamination, and any failure of the product to meet specifications established for approval. Annual reports shall be submitted within 60 days of the anniversary date of U.S. approval. The report should include significant news information from the previous year that might affect the safety, effectiveness, or labeling of the product, and any actions you have taken or intend to take as a result of this new information. For example, to submit a labeling supplement, add a warning to the label, or to initiate a new study. The annual report must also include information related to the distribution of the product, although disclosure of financial data is not required. A summary of any updates made to the labeling, including any pediatric-related revisions, any product quality changes, reports of non-clinical trials, any information related to clinical trials initiated, conducted, or completed, including pediatric trials, and an update on any PMC, PMR related trials. At your discretion, you may also include a log of any open or pending regulatory matters with the FDA. So you must provide examples of any labeling or advertising device for promotion of the product at the time that information is initially disseminated or published. The FDA may require you to provide reports at different timelines other than stated within this section, and if this occurs, you will be notified in writing. If the approved product is life-supporting, life-sustaining, or intended for use in the prevention or treatment of a debilitating disease or condition, you must inform the FDA in writing of any permanent discontinuance or interruption of manufacture of the product that is likely to lead to a meaningful disruption in the supply of that product in the U.S. If the discontinuance or interruption is expected or planned, then notification must occur at least 6 months prior to the date of discontinuance or interruption. If unanticipated, the FDA must be notified as soon as practicable, but in no case later than 5 business days after the discontinuance or interruption has occurred. And if an applicant fails to provide any of the reports required in this section, the FDA may withdraw approval of the application and prohibit continued marketing of the product. Waivers. So you may request a waiver to waive any requirement that applies to the applicant under sections 314.50 through 314.81. In addition, you may ask the FDA to waive any criteria of an adequate and well-controlled study as defined in section 314.126B. So a waiver can be granted if the FDA agrees that your compliance with the requirement is unnecessary for the FDA to evaluate the NDA, or compliance cannot be achieved. In addition, your alternative proposal either satisfies the regulatory requirement, or finally, if your submission otherwise justifies the waiver. Change in ownership of an application. So an applicant may transfer ownership of its NDA application. At the time of transfer, the new and former owners are required to submit information to the FDA that includes a letter or other documentation from the former owner stating that all rights to the application have been transferred to the new owner. The new owner shall submit an application form, FDA Form 356H, and provide documentation confirming their commitment to follow any agreements, promises, and conditions made by the former owner and contained in the application and the effective date of the change of ownership. The owner must certify that they have received a complete copy of the approved application, including supplements and records that are required to be kept. The new owner may also request a copy of the application from the FDA's files. So Section 314.7 outlines how changes to your existing NDA can be made, and I'll be going over this process in the next section. Please note that there is an exception to this notification in which the new owner may notify the FDA in the next annual report about specific changes in the product's label or labeling to update the product's brand or to change the name of the product manufacturer, packer, or distributor. In this section, we're going to discuss additional obligations that an applicant may have depending on the conditions for approval of their NDA. This will include submitting changes to your existing NDA as supplements, as well as an overview of post-marketing requirements, or PMRs, post-marketing commitments, or PMCs, and risk evaluation and mitigation strategies, also known as REMS, that may have either been required or agreed to as a condition of approval. I'll also briefly discuss post-approval safety labeling changes, or SLCs, that could be required if labeling updates are determined to be warranted based on new safety information. As with the previous section, the purpose is not to ensure a comprehensive step-by-step review of all the requirements, but rather to provide a condensed summary. As always, please refer to the specific regulatory reference and any applicable guidances for additional details or information. Changes to an approved NDA. So you must notify the FDA about each change in each condition established in an approved NDA beyond what was already provided for in the initially approved NDA. You must also provide an assessment of the anticipated effects of the planned modifications before releasing the revised product for manufacturing-related changes. Depending on the nature or extent of the proposed labeling changes, you may only have to include the information in the next NDA annual report, or you could be required to submit a separate supplement to the approved NDA. We'll discuss the criteria for the various supplement types in the preceding slides. For U.S. applicants, the field copy goes to the appropriate FDA district field office. For foreign applicants, the field copy should be provided to the Central Document Room address in Beltsville, Maryland. Okay, next we're going to discuss what type of supplement you would submit if you have major changes to make to the NDA. This is also known as a prior approval supplement, or PAS. And a major change is defined as a change that has a substantial potential to have an adverse effect on the product's identity, strength, quality, purity, or potency, as these factors can have a significant effect on the safety or efficacy of the product. A major change requires the submission of a supplement and approval by the FDA prior to distribution of the modified product. The supplement should be labeled as a prior approval supplement when submitted. Please note that review timelines for supplements are PDUFA goals and not a regulatory requirement. Manufacturing-related supplements that require approval should be reviewed within 4 months, and all other manufacturing supplements within 6 months. Review of labeling supplements are neither a PDUFA goal nor a regulatory requirement and depend largely on division workload at the time of submission. However, reviews are usually completed within 6 months. You can request an expedited review of a prior approval supplement for public health reasons, for example, a drug shortage, or if a delay in making the change described in it would impose an extraordinary hardship. The FDA is most likely to grant requests for expedited review based on extraordinary hardship for manufacturing changes made necessary by catastrophic events, for example, a fire, or by events that could not be reasonably foreseen and for which the applicant could not plan. This type of supplement should be clearly labeled as a prior approval supplement expedited review requested. And the FDA will confirm if your request for an expedited review is granted or denied. Okay, next we're going to discuss the types of supplements that would be submitted for moderate changes. So these are known as a changes being affected in 30 days or a CBE 30 supplement. And a moderate change is a change that has a moderate potential to have an adverse effect on any of the physical or pharmaceutical aspects of the product. The supplement must be submitted to the FDA at least 30 days before the distribution of the modified product. For each change, the supplement must contain information determined by the FDA to be appropriate and must include information from the applicant assessing the effects of the change. If the FDA informs you within 30 days of receipt that the information is missing or incomplete, distribution must be delayed until the supplement has been amended to provide the missing information. In addition, the product cannot be distributed if the FDA informs the applicant within 30 days of receipt of the supplement that a prior approval supplement is required instead of a CBE 30 supplement. So under this section, the FDA may identify certain moderate changes for which distribution can occur after the FDA receives the supplement. This type of supplement is called and should be clearly labeled a supplement changes being affected, also known as a CBE 0 supplement. If after review the FDA disapproves a CBE 30 or CBE 0 supplement, the FDA may order the manufacturer to cease distribution of the product. Okay, now we'll discuss about the type of supplements that would be minor changes, and these would be included within the annual report. So a minor change is a change that has minimal potential to have an adverse effect on any of the physical or pharmaceutical aspects of the product. No supplement is required to be submitted. However, you must describe the changes in the next annual report. So sections B, C, and D and changes to the approved NDA or ANDA guidance contain an extensive but not exhaustive list of examples for each supplement category. And I would highly suggest referring to those when trying to decide if you're going to be submitting a PAS, CBE 30, CBE 0, or annual report changes. So the FDA makes the final determination on the reporting category, whether it will be a PAS, a CBE, or annual report changes. Under Section 314.70E, you may submit what are called comparability protocols that describe any tests, studies, and acceptance criteria to demonstrate the absence of an adverse effect from specific types of manufacturing changes concerning the physical or pharmaceutical aspects of the product. So those are, as we've discussed before, the identity, strength, quality, purity, and potency of the drug product. A comparability protocol can be used to reduce the reporting category for specific changes. However, please note that a proposed comparability protocol that was not approved as part of the original application must be submitted as a prior approval supplement. In some situations, the FDA may require an applicant to submit proposed changes as a new NDA application rather than as a supplement. Therefore, please refer to the guidance for industry submitting separate marketing applications and clinical data for purposes of assessing user fees for additional information. And a link to the guidance has been included in the resources slides. So an efficacy supplement is defined within 314.3b. And this is a long definition that I am paraphrasing from section 3b, so I'll just pause for a moment to let you go over it. So just for your reference, subpart H near the bottom of the definition is referring to accelerated approval applications. Similar to the review timelines for supplements, review timelines for efficacy supplements are a PDUFA goal and not a regulatory requirement. The goal is 6 months for a priority review and 10 months for a standard review. As with other types of supplements, the FDA may require you to submit the proposed changes as a new NDA application rather than as a supplement. So again, please refer to the previous referenced guidance. Okay, now we're going to briefly discuss pediatric assessments. We're going to be leaving CFR references behind now. We're going to be talking about some of the requirements that come from different sections of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. Again, this is a long definition that I'm paraphrasing from section 505B of the Act, so I'll pause for a moment so that you can read through it. So a deferral allows you to delay submission of some or all assessments of the safety and effectiveness in pediatric patients until after approval of the product for use in adults. Deferrals may be granted if, among other reasons, the product is ready for approval in adults before studies in pediatric patients are complete, or if pediatric studies should be delayed until additional safety or effectiveness data has been collected. A full or partial waiver of the requirements to conduct trials in pediatric patients can be granted if warranted. An applicant may request a waiver if you can certify that the product does not present a meaningful therapeutic benefit over existing treatments and is not likely to be used in a substantial number of pediatric patients, or if the necessary studies are impossible or highly impractical to conduct, for example, because the number of patients is so small or they're geographically dispersed, or if there's evidence to strongly suggest that the product would be ineffective or unsafe in pediatric age groups. In addition, you may request a partial waiver if you can demonstrate that reasonable attempts to produce a pediatric formulation necessary for a particular age group have failed. As this is a very complicated area of discussion, please refer to the Pediatric Product Development webpage for additional information concerning pediatric-related studies and associated regulatory requirements. And I've also included a link to that webpage in the resources slide. Okay, post-marketing studies and clinical trials. So the FDA may be concerned about potential risks associated with the use of a product and believe that the risk is serious, but may not know enough about the risk through either adverse event reporting or otherwise to determine how to address the risk in labeling and what information would be appropriate to include. In such cases, the FDA can require you to conduct additional post-marketing studies or clinical trials to obtain more information about the risk. Clinical trials are any proposed investigations in which the applicant or investigator determines the method of assigning the products or other interventions to one or more volunteers. For example, if you are administering a pharmaceutical product to volunteers. Studies, on the other hand, are all other types of investigations, such as observational or epidemiological studies in humans, animal studies, and laboratory experiments. Post-marketing studies and clinical trials may be required for any or all of the following purposes: to assess a known serious risk related to the use of the product, to assess signals of a serious risk related to use of the product, and/or to identify an unexpected serious risk when available data indicate the potential for a serious risk. So in this section, 505K1 refers to the expedited reporting that occurs either via FAERS, which is the FDA Adverse Experience Reporting System, or VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Experience Reporting System. 505K3 refers to active risk identification and analyses of data from healthcare databases. The FDA's determination of whether the information available under subsections K1 and K3 is sufficient is based on analysis of multiple factors, including the nature of the serious risk, the appropriate type of investigation to assess or identify the particular serious risk, the strengths and limitations of electronic health data and adverse event report data to assess the specific serious risk, the scientific tools available to evaluate this data, and the extent to which the available data informs the serious risk. The FDA cannot recommend a post-marketing clinical trial be conducted if a post-marketing study would provide sufficient information to assess the risks associated with the use of the product. So a post-marketing requirement, or PMR. So a serious risk in this case is considered to be synonymous with the risk of a serious adverse drug experience occurring. Please note that if you fail to comply with a PMR, the FDA could choose to initiate enforcement action, including charges under Section 505 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act concerning the introduction or delivery of products into interstate commerce, misbranding under 502Z, or impose in civil monetary penalties. Now, that being said, the FDA generally decides to continue to work with an applicant in coordination with the Office of Compliance to seek resolution of the disputed issues. The FDA will communicate a list of potential requirements and commitments, clearly delineated as to which are required and which may be agreed upon, to the applicant, along with a brief rationale for why FDA thinks these studies and clinical trials are appropriate. The list should also include a request for a proposed timetable for completion. The applicant will have the opportunity to discuss the design and conduct of the studies and trials, as well as the overall goal with the FDA review team. The FDA review team works with the applicant on the design and conduct of the PMR. The review team intends to review the potential study or clinical trial designs to make sure they will serve the purposes of the study or clinical trial, and to assess whether the proposed timetable will be realistic and will provide for a timely completion of the study or clinical trial. Milestone dates are a series of goal dates by which the FDA measures the progress of studies and clinical trials in compliance with the requirements. These may include a final protocol submission date, study or trial initiation date, study or trial completion date, and the final report submission date. And for those of you who may not be aware, PREA refers to the Pediatric Research Equity Act, and FDA refers to the Food and Drug Administration Amendments Act. Post-marketing commitment. An applicant agrees to conduct the PMC trials or studies, but the FDA is not authorized to take any enforcement action if they fail to comply. A PMC may be requested to address issues that are not specifically related to serious safety risks and therefore do not rise to the statutory level of requiring a PMR. Please note that certain PMCs are not reportable per Section 506B of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. For example, any PMCs intended to evaluate product quality issues. So while all PMRs are listed on the web page, the site does not include PMCs involving proprietary information, and the web page is updated quarterly. As this can be another complicated area to navigate, I've included links to some of the relevant guidances in the post-market requirements and commitments webpage on the resources slide. So risk evaluation and mitigation strategies, or REMS. So the FDA uses the following considerations to determine if a REMS is warranted: whether there is a particular risk or risks associated with the product that, on balance, outweigh its benefits, and whether additional interventions beyond FDA-approved labeling are necessary to ensure that the product's benefits outweigh its risks. The potential burden of the requirements are also considered when developing a REMS. So a REMS may include one or more of the following: a medication guide to provide information the FDA has deemed necessary to the patient's safe and effective use of the product, a patient package insert that offers additional information about the product to improve compliance and help patients avoid some potential errors from medication misuse, a communication plan to inform healthcare providers about the risks associated with the use of the product, and elements to assure safe use, also known as ETASU, E-T-A-S-U. Examples of ETASU can include requiring healthcare providers who prescribe the drug to have particular training or experience, or be specially certified to dispense the product. Ensuring that the product can be dispensed or administered to patients in only certain healthcare settings, such as hospitals. Requiring that the product be dispensed to patients with evidence or other documentation of safe use conditions, such as a laboratory test result. Finally, any patients using the product could be subject to monitoring or be enrolled in a registry. Depending on the various elements included in the REMS, an implementation system to enable you to monitor, evaluate, and improve the implementation of these elements may also be incorporated. So the FDA maintains a publicly available webpage for currently approved REMS, and I've included links to the REMS-related guidances and to this webpage on the resources slide. Safety labeling changes. So you have 30 days to respond to the notification letter that the FDA will send you if they have determined that a safety labeling change is warranted. And the FDA will attempt to complete the review of the updated labeling within 30 days of receipt. If you feel that the SLC is not warranted, you may submit a rebuttal to the FDA, which has 30 days to respond, either accepting or rejecting your justification. And I would refer to the guidance for industry on safety labeling changes for additional clarification of this discussion period, as there is some additional back and forth that can occur that I have not included on the slide. Please note that if you fail to comply with the safety labeling change, the FDA can choose to initiate enforcement action similar to what I outlined for PMRs, which could include charges under Section 505 for introduction or delivery of products into interstate commerce, misbranding, or civil monetary penalties. But again, the same caveat applies that we generally do try to continue to work with the applicant in coordination with the Office of Compliance in order to seek resolution on any disputed issues. So if you submit a supplement proposing labeling changes identical to those that the FDA has included in the notification letter, you may submit the changes as a CBE 0 supplement. In all other situations, you should submit a prior approval supplement to propose alternative labeling changes that reflect the new safety information. The FDA will provide instructions within the notification letter regarding the type of supplement that should be submitted. Please note that the FDA also maintains a publicly available webpage of currently approved safety labeling changes. And as with these other topics I've discussed, I've included a link to the relevant guidance in the resources slide, as well as a link to the webpage. Okay, so today I presented a very cursory overview of your responsibilities as an applicant once your NDA has been approved. I initially went over some responsibilities that apply to all NDA applicants, and then we focused on some additional post-approval activities that may occur depending on the nature of your application, including changes to your existing NDA, submission of various supplements, and a brief review of PMRs, PMCs, and/or REMS that you may have incurred as a condition of approval. Lastly, we also discussed safety labeling changes that may be required if new safety information arises post-approval. Finally, as I have indicated numerous times during this presentation, many of these requirements or obligations are very complicated, so this presentation should only be considered a stepping stone, and you should follow up directly with the FDA if you have any questions or require further clarification. As always, should you have any questions concerning your application, please feel free to contact the RPM assigned to manage your application. We're your first stop when seeking additional information about your NDA. In the next 3 slides, I'm going to revisit the CME challenge questions that I had initially showed you at the beginning of the presentation, and hopefully you'll be able to provide the correct answers. So challenge question number 1, true or false? US-based applicants only need to submit post-marketing 15-day alert reports for events that occur within the US. Is this true or false? And I jumped the gun, and as you can see, this is false. So according to section 314.80C, the applicant must report each adverse drug experience that is both serious and unexpected, whether foreign or domestic, as soon as possible, but no later than 15 days from the initial receipt of the information by the applicant. Okay, question number 2. Which of the following information does not need to be included in the NDA annual report? A, the quantity of the drug product distributed. B, PMR or PMC status reports. C, summaries of completed unpublished clinical trials. Or D, current pricing data. So the correct answer is D, current pricing data. Per section 314.81B, disclosure of financial or pricing data is not required to be included in the annual report. All right, now our last question, question number 3. Once a CBE 30 labeling supplement has been approved, how long does an applicant have to implement the changes to the promotional labeling and advertising? A, it must be updated promptly. B, 15 days. C, 1 month. D, prior to submitting the next NDA annual report. So the correct answer is A, it must be updated promptly. So according to section 314.70A, the applicant must promptly revise all promotional labeling and advertising to make it consistent with any labeling change implemented in accordance with paragraphs B and C of this section. And if you recall from earlier in the presentation, section B covers the prior approval supplement submissions, and section C is for the CBE 30 and CBE 0 supplements. Okay, so this slide and the next slide contains links to all of the relevant regulatory citations and associated guidances that I used in preparing this presentation for your reference. And I will just pause here briefly so you can read the entries both on this page and the next page. All right. With that, this concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time and attention this morning, especially as lunch is looming over the horizon. However, before you're released for your lunch break, we do have some time now to go over some of your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Larry, for that fantastic presentation. We have so many questions that came in, and if for our audience, if you would like to submit a question for Lawrence Allan for him to answer, just type it into the Q&A chat pod in the lower right hand. And we've actually been getting a lot of questions about how to download your slides or download all of the slides for the conference. And so I just want to go ahead and let you know you can go to www.sbiaevents.com. You click on the orange button, and that'll take you to our event page, or in the email earlier, it'll take you to the event page. And you just scroll down and you look for the slides and you click the zip file, and that'll give you all of the day 1, day 2 slides, and you can go ahead and keep them for your reference. So, and with that, I think we're going to go ahead and get started with a few questions for Larry. And
Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to give us this presentation and really kind of dig in with these questions. So, one of our first ones has to do with, are there any special regulatory requirements when submitting the very first annual report after the approval of the application?
So in this situation, I am assuming that the questioner was asking their initial annual report that they submit for their NDA, and to the best of my knowledge, there are no special regulatory requirements for that initial annual report. There's nothing outlined within 314 that says, for your first report you have to include this information, and then you don't need to include it for any other reports. So the answer would be no.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Larry. We have another question. And if an approved drug has a REMS attached to it, does that mean that a generic version can't also be marketed? And I'm hearing it's a little bit soft, so if you want to go ahead and use your super loud voice, that would be fantastic.
Hello, did you hear me that time?
Oh, I can hear you now, but I missed the first part.
Great. Okay. So with regard to if an approved NDA has a REMS, does that mean that you cannot have a generic drug manufactured? And the answer is no. What the law does require, though, is that if an approved drug does have a REMS and you're planning to make a generic version of that, that you must also have a REMS for the generic version as well. So sometimes both the applicant of the approved product and the generic version's manufacturer will work to implement a joint or shared systems REMS. If that is not the case, there are also situations where they can have different REMS, but the REMS still must be similar with regard to the goals and the requirements and ensuring that there are comparable processes in place to address the risks associated with the use of the product.
All right, great. Thank you so much. And we have a timely question for you as well. So how is FDA treating the 15-day reports for COVID-19? And thank you for speaking so loudly. We can hear you so clearly.
Great. I'm assuming this is referring to the post-marketing 15-day alert reports. And if that is the case, then there is no difference with regard to reporting events of COVID-19 infection or related to COVID-19 infection versus any other types of reports that you would need to submit to the FDA. Again, just to go over those requirements, it's anything that is serious and unexpected adverse drug experiences.
Great, thank you for that answer. All right, we have a form question for you. Is the FDA Form 356H required in case of a full acquisition of an NDA holder by another company? Are there any specific timelines for the Form 356H submission?
Okay, so I assume this is referring to my slide on the transfer of ownership of an NDA. And with that, there is no specific timeline outlined within 314.72. It's basically, I think the wording in the regulation says at the time of transfer, so basically as soon as possible. And yes, the new applicant does need to submit a new Form 356H to the FDA at the time of transfer.
Great, thank you, Larry. All right, another question for you. So are the periodic adverse event safe, is that reporting, if the periodic benefit risk evaluation reports, can they be submitted in lieu of the adverse events? Do companies need an official waiver to submit?
So you do have to submit a request to the FDA initially, whether if you would prefer to use the PBRER report versus the PEDAR report. And this is regardless of whether or not you already have a waiver for a PSUR, the Periodic Safety Update Report. So the question is yes, if you wish to use the PBRER report, you do need to submit a request to the FDA first, and then we will review your request, and then assuming that you've provided sufficient information, then we will grant the request, and then you may go ahead and submit the PBRER report in lieu of a PEDAR report. Because as I indicated on my slides, the PEDAR report is specific to the U.S.
Okay, great. And another follow-up question on the PEDAR and PBRER. Are those completely separate from the annual report?
Yes, they are. Although the annual report does contain some similar information to the PEDAR or PBRER report, they are two different types of reports that have their own submission timelines and requirements.
Okay, great. Our next question is, what is the difference between CBE 30 and CBE immediate type of changes? Are both of them moderate, or how do you know when to do one versus the other?
I so wish that I could give an easy answer for that. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. That's why I did mention in the slide to refer not only to the specific guidance reference, but also to the changes to an approved NDA guidance as well, because both of those documents do lay out some specific examples of when you should, for example, submit a CBE 30 versus a CBE 0. So it would be very hard for me to kind of give an easy answer for that, but what I will do is I will quote from the appropriate section of paragraph 6 from 314.70. And one of the first things it does say is that the changes that can be made for a CBE 0 supplement include, but are not limited to, an addition to a specification or change in the methods or controls to provide increased assurance that the drug substance or drug product will have the characteristics of identity, strength, quality, purity, or potency. So again, I would refer to those guidances, and also, as I said a couple times in my presentation, if you have any questions, to please follow up also with whoever the RPM is assigned to manage your application, because they can help you with that. It's very difficult to be able to give you, an example where this is always going to result in a CDE 30 submission, whereas this other example will always mean that you have to submit as a CDE 0. So that
okay,
was
great.
a way of basically saying it's complicated.
Thank you. Well, it's helpful to have a little bit of a perspective and to know that it is a complicated answer. So, all right, we have another question for you. Has FDA taken action against sponsors for late PMRs?
So I can say that in the time that I was working in a review division, we specifically did not take any action against an applicant for a late PMR. I did mention the potential that there could be actions taken because, again, PMRs are required, and the FDA was given the teeth to enforce those requirements versus the changes that were made to the statutory regulation. And again, as I admitted during my talk, while we could take those actions, generally speaking, we do work with applicants through the Office of Compliance to ensure that we can try to resolve whatever disputes there are before having to take any sort of official regulatory action.
Okay, great, thank you. And now we have a question on annual reports. Does the FDA review the annual reports, or what does FDA do with them once they receive them?
Yes, so the FDA does review annual reports. That being said, I will note that there is no regulatory requirement or PDUFA goal that says we must review your annual report within X time. So the reports are added to the workload of the division, and the reviewers do review them as their workload permits.
All right, great, thank you. And I think this is going to be our next to last question. Could you provide some examples of manufacturing interruptions?
Well, given the current time of year in the U.S., let's say, for example, that you happen to be in an area that is hit with a hurricane and you have some massive flooding that occurs within your manufacturing facility. That would be an example of such a type of interruption that could occur, and also that you would not obviously be planned, and you would have to inform us and then inform us of what your plan of action is, stuff like that. That's the one that immediately comes to mind, but it's basically anything that could occur that interrupts your ability to manufacture your product, whether it's something within your control and or outside of your control. And as I indicated previously in the presentation, you do need to inform us, especially if it's something within your control 6 months prior to this occurring. If it's something outside of your control, as in the hurricane example that I mentioned, then you would have to notify us within 5 business days of the interruption occurring.
Great, thank you so much, Larry. And that actually wraps up our Q&A. We appreciate your